Hi, everyone. I'm Kieran O'Dwyer, Vice President of Corporate Communications at Mutual of America Financial Group. Thanks for joining our webinar, Secure 2.0 Act, What's Coming in 2024. Before we get started, just a quick housekeeping note. We'll display a QR code at the end of the webinar for you to download the presentation slides. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today, Earl Jones, Vice President of National Accounts, and Nick Caraba, Senior Vice President and Associate General Counsel. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
Thanks, Kieran. Really looking forward to digging into the details of Secure 2.0 Act.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for setting this up, and I'm looking forward to getting into the details and answering any questions that folks might have.
Great. Well, we do have a lot of ground to cover. Secure 2.0 includes more than 90 provisions, and we're going to be focusing, as I said, on key provisions required for 2024 and those that are optional, to better understand how these will or may impact how employers run their plans now and in the future. We'll also let you know what you can expect from Mutual of America, including monitoring for regulatory guidance, plan amendments, and additional communications to help you navigate Secure 2.0 in the year ahead. As you may know, the Secure 2.0 Act was signed into law in December of 2022 as part of a huge year-end federal spending bill from Congress. The Act follows up on the Secure Act of 2019 and continues with the objective of broadening the appeal of workplace retirement plans. Ultimately, Secure 2.0 is aimed at providing employers with opportunities to expand plan coverage and simplify plan rules and administration. Importantly, for employees, the Act also offers more opportunities to help individuals save more for retirement and to plan for a financially secure future. The provisions we're going to cover impact retirement plans, participants, long-term, part-time workers, and range from RMDs to catch-up limits, Roth provisions to IRAs. But with that, Nick, I know there's some themes that are going to run throughout the conversation today that folks should be mindful of.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Karen. I think the one thing I would point out is that what we're trying to do is focus on just those provisions that we feel most impact plan sponsors in 2024. So as Karen mentioned, there are over 90 provisions that were enacted as part of Secure 2.0. And they have effective dates running from the date of enactment, which was back in 2022, all the way through 2026. So again, what we want to focus on today are just the provisions that are becoming effective in 2024. And we're going to make a distinction between those that are mandatory, those things that plan sponsors must do, and then other ones that plan sponsors may do, or permissive or discretionary provisions. And we'll talk about those as we go through the slides. The one caveat I'd make on that is that we're not providing a comprehensive list of all the provisions that are effective in 2024, just those that impact plan sponsors. There are many provisions in the Act that are more of the individual nature, that don't impact the way a plan is operated. So we've, for sake of brevity and being concise, we've just focused on those that have a direct impact on plan sponsors. And the second caveat I always make on these types of presentations, and one you will probably get tired of hearing me say by the end of this hour, is that many of these things are subject to additional regulatory guidance. As you know, being a plan sponsor, qualified plans, 403B plans are heavily regulated by both the Department of Labor and the IRS. And these provisions that were enacted in this legislation really do require those agencies to weigh in with some additional details on how they should be implemented. So we're waiting on that. We've been pushing both agencies to provide as much guidance as they can, as early as they can, and we continue to hope that they'll provide us a clear pathway forward in the relatively short future. The good news, though, I think for plan sponsors, is that there are no required plan amendments that need to be adopted anytime soon. There will be required amendments, but this Act, Secure 2.0, included a very generous remedial amendment period, meaning that plans won't have to formally amend their plan until the end of their 2025 plan year. So again, for a calendar year plan, that's December 31st, 2025. And those amendments will then be retroactive to the effective date of the provision. And even better, because this Act followed on so closely to the first Secure Act in 2019, the Secure 2.0 also extended that remedial amendment period for all the provisions that were required to be effective beginning in 2019. So lots of leeway here, nothing to panic about in terms of getting plan documents into shape. And of course, Mutual of America will be there to help you through all that when the time comes. But with that, let's move on to some of the substantive provisions I think you need to be focused on for the upcoming year. Karen?
Great, thanks, Nick. And I don't think we'll tire of hearing from you on that front. Those are important things for everybody really on this webinar today to hear and be reminded about, as they look to navigate Secure 2.0 moving forward. So appreciate that. Earl, let's jump right in. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Roth catch-up discussion. So by now, I know we all know that the implementation of this provision has been delayed to until 2026, but let's step back for a minute to understand the provision itself. Before Secure 2.0, catch-up contributions could be made on a pre-tax or Roth basis if permitted by plan sponsors. And all eligible participants under the plan generally had to be allowed to make the same election with respect to catch-up contributions. So with that, Earl, as a backdrop, can you take us through some of the key aspects of the provision?
Absolutely, Kieran. And so the first thing is that for what Nick had shared, there is a transition period. So it kind of de-stresses and depressurizes our plan sponsors. But here's the mandatory provision, and it focuses in on those participants who have made $145,000 in the previous year. And so normally, prior to this provision kicking in, all catch-up contributions at the age of 50 would have to be allocated to on a pre-tax basis. Now, for those individuals, those catch-up contributions will have to be made on a Roth basis. And so in a real sense, there is a diversity of tax treatment within a retirement plan, obviously with the pre-tax, bucket of money, but then also for the after-tax, you pay the taxes up front, the income grows tax deferred, and at the point of withdrawal, there's a tax-free withdrawal on the income that is generated. And so, this is something that, if you have a Roth feature at this present time, there's nothing necessarily you have to do, but it's something to be mindful of. We're looking for more guidance on that, but this is something that certainly conversations need to be had as it relates to whether to include a Roth feature in your plan, because not all plan sponsors have a Roth feature. And so this should affect a conversation with plan sponsors, the executive leadership, the board on the board level. And so there is a transition period in 2024, 2025. And so technically, those people who are kind of targeted in a sense, who make over 145,000 can kind of go about business as usual and continue their pre-tax contributions until 2026. However, Nick can help me on this point. There is that transition period that we're looking for greater guidance on it. And so the reason being is that there's still some unanswered questions as it relates to this particular provision that we need some fleshing out just a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And just to add to that, Earl, I mean, this provision probably was targeted very shortly after enactment as being problematic. There were several things that sort of jumped out at all of us when we first were able to read the legislative text. One of which is that Congress inadvertently omitted a section of the tax code that authorizes catch-up contributions to be made by anyone, whether on a Roth basis or a pre-tax basis. Clearly a legislative drafting error, and folks up on Capitol Hill have acknowledged that, and have vowed to try to pass corrective technical corrections legislation, as they call it. In the interim, though, what the IRS was able to do is issue this notice, Notice 2362, that really helps out in terms of overlooking that legislative drafting error, and also providing, as Earl mentioned, sort of a 2-year transition period to the effective date. And that's going to help out with a lot of questions. Again, in addition to just that legislative drafting error, there were questions about how to implement this for folks, for instance, who are new hires, who maybe you hire someone in the middle of the year or towards the end of the year, who at their last employer made well over $145,000, but you have no idea as a new employer that they did. And then in the current year, for you as an employer, they make less than $145,000. But clearly, on an annual basis, they will. How do you handle that person? How do you treat that person? Do you allow them to make catch-up contributions based on wages actually paid, or is it on an annualized basis? In addition, questions were raised about what about people who make incorrect elections? If a person who clearly is going to make more than $145,000 in the prior year makes a catch-up contribution election on a pre-tax basis, will the plan administrator have the ability to override that incorrect election and place them in the Roth, in the designated Roth account? So questions like that were swirling about. There was a big push in Washington, D.C., with trade associations and employers alike, record keepers, the whole sort of regulated community got involved in pushing the Department of Treasury and the IRS to issue some relief to the enactment of this provision, to the effective date of this provision. And fortunately, the IRS heard us and did that. So as Earl mentioned, there's a 2-year transition period. Nothing has to be done until 2026. In addition, the IRS clarified that if you don't have a designated Roth account in your plan, you don't have to add one to allow catch-ups. You can allow catch-up contributions for everyone in your plan going forward, regardless of this provision. And then in the meantime, they promised, the IRS did, that they would issue more comprehensive guidance on some of these more particular questions that they've been asked. They hinted at some of what they'll say. They suggested, for instance, that if there is an incorrect election made by a participant who was covered by this provision, that the plan administrator could indeed override that incorrect election and place them directly into the Roth bucket. They also suggested that if you're employed in a multi or a multiple employer plan context, earnings made with one employer wouldn't necessarily need to be aggregated with earnings made from another employer. So that'll help as well for those types of plans. But anyway, more to come on that from the IRS, and we're certainly keeping our eyes open for more comprehensive guidance on that. Karen, what's up next?
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And to your point, I think that this is a provision we'll definitely be talking about in our upcoming webinars and communicating out over the next couple of years for sure. Next, what I'd like to really shift gears to a provision that's actually been getting a lot of attention since Secure 1.0 in 2019, and that affects long-term part-time workers. Broadly speaking, this provision ensures that part-time employees working with companies over fewer hours than in the past can have access to essential retirement benefits. Earl, so I want to just check in with you on this, see if you could give some insights on how might this provision allow companies to help employees plan better for retirement and achieve financial stability earlier than they may have been able to do in the past, employees, that is.
Well, thanks, Karen. I think that this particular provision embodies the spirit of this act and the thinking behind, the legislators' push to broaden coverage for those who've been working with an employer for a term of years. And prior to this act, they were not eligible to participate, right, on any level. And so now, we're seeing the effective date of the first iteration of the Secure Act, which was in 2019. So that was geared toward 401k plans. And so prior for someone to be eligible, they would have to work at least 1,000 hours in the first year and be over the age of 21. So now the effective date from the first Secure Act allows for part-time workers to be eligible to participate in the plan with their salary deferrals if they worked for 3 consecutive years and have worked 500 hours, right? And so that's the effective date. And certainly the whole backdrop is there's a remedial amendment period, right, to transition into that. But that's the effective date. However, the Secure 2.0 took another look at this, and I don't think they felt like they went far enough. And so what's happening here is that they are going to lower the amount of years in order for part-time workers to be eligible from 3 years to 2 years. And then they've also expanded coverage to 403B plans subject to ERISA. Now, let me just take a step back. When you get into the 403B space, there are some other nuances that we need further guidance. I'm sure Nick will help us on that. But here's the clear thing for plan sponsors that I want our plan sponsors to note. There's not a requirement to make employer contributions on part-time workers who've been designated in this provision. I know that's probably a concern for some, and for others, they would just include them in a matching or non-elective contribution, but it's not required. So again, want to de-stress some of these plan sponsors to say, okay, what does this mean for us in terms of the impact on the organization? And so there's no requirement. However, if there will be a matching contribution or a non-elective contribution for part-time workers, the vesting schedule is going to be based on that 500-hour year, right? And so again, this is something for 2024 that's going to take effect. That's the effective date. And then it's going to change a bit for 403B plans in 2025. So in broad strokes, that's the provision that we're looking at, and hopefully that is helpful. But Nick is going to share a little bit about just some of the nuances with respect to the provision as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I mean, I think you laid it out pretty well. The complicating factor here is that there's sort of overlapping provisions in 2 separate bills that were enacted very closely to one another, which is sort of unprecedented in a way, at least in this space. You don't often see this where legislation so closely follows another piece of legislation that directly changes and expands what was just done. So it's a little bit tricky and and you have to sort of step through it one by one. But I think Earl did a good job on it. This in 2024, just to underscore it, what's becoming effective is actually provisions from the first Secure Act, and it only applies to 401k plans, and it only requires you to offer the opportunity to enroll folks who've worked at least 500 hours in the last 3 years. So as all plans know, we should have been counting hours for our part-time employees from 2021 forward. So now 2024 is the third year when folks need to be offered the opportunity to enroll. As Earl mentioned, though, you don't have to match that contribution if anyone takes advantage of it, and there doesn't have to be a non-elective base contribution by the employer. Also, a good piece of news is that those employees that are now enrolled in the plan or have an opportunity to enroll in the plan aren't counted under any non-discrimination testing, so you don't have to worry about that as well. So one thing to think about if you're a plan where you're beginning to enroll a long-term part-time folks, and while Earl mentioned, and he's right, you don't have to have a plan amendment, and there's going to be this remedial amendment period that will become that you'll have until the end of 2025 to formally amend your plan. If, as a plan sponsor, you decide not to include these individuals and any employer contributions, it's probably a good idea to document that decision. Again, doesn't have to necessarily be a formal plan amendment, but have some type of documented decision that that's the way you want to do it. And then when the plan amendment comes due, you'll have that to rely on, and certainly wouldn't have any compliance issues. But it's something to think through whether or not you want those employer contributions to apply to these individuals. If, for instance, you have a plan right now that doesn't have a 1,000-hour requirement, then you don't have to worry about anything. Then these folks are going to be enrolled in your plan, and they'll be subject to all the provisions in the plan that you have now. If you have a 403B plan, then your considerations are a little bit different. You need to start counting hours for individuals beginning in 2023, and then through 2024, and then beginning in 1/1/25 for a calendar plan year. That's when the first opportunity for those individuals to enroll in the plan will be. So a little bit of a different timing mechanism for 403B plans. The other thing, again, to repeat my favorite phrase, what we're waiting for on guidance from the IRS is really surrounding 403Bs. There's other issues as well, but the biggest one, I think, is how the IRS will reconcile this rule with what's known as the universal availability rule, which I'm sure all you 403B plan sponsors out there are familiar with, which already essentially requires you to offer an enrollment opportunity to all your employees, whether they're full-time or part-time, unless you take advantage of a special rule under that universal availability rule that allows you to exclude workers who normally work less than 20 hours a week. Well, if you do that, then there's a conflict between how you're going to administer that rule versus how you're going to have to administer this long-term part-time rule. And the IRS is aware of that conflict, and hopefully we'll get some guidance on how to work through that. But again, more to come on that one. But again, just to underscore everything, right now, no formal plan amendment needed. If you're a 401k plan sponsor, what you want to be thinking about is whether or not to permit employer contributions to be made, either matching or non-elective, to these individuals, and if not, to document that decision. And if you're a 403B plan sponsor, all you need to do is start counting hours for the people who work about 500 hours a year for this year, next year, to enroll them in the following year.
Great, thanks, Nick. A lot of dates and timelines to remember, and I similar to Roth catch-ups, I think we could do a full webinar on this provision. But in the interest of time, another mandatory provision that has drawn a lot of attention relates to changes for required minimum distributions, or RMDs, both for designated Roth accounts and for surviving spouses. And Nick, I want to stick with you here, and let's start with designated Roth accounts. Some aspects of the provision already kicked in at the start of this year, in 2023. We know some changes are going to go into effect in 2024, and actually there's still others that are going to be updated, I think, by 2033, if I'm not mistaken. Could you take us through some of the key aspects of this provision, especially what folks should know for the next year?
Yeah, you bet. So, Karen, yeah, the first Secure Act in 2019 increased the required minimum age, what's called the required beginning date, from 72 to 73, and Secure. From 70 and a half to 72. Secure 2.0 has now increased that required beginning date to 73. And then, as you mentioned, in 2033, so 10 years from now, the age will increase again to 75. And again, that date is the date at which individuals have to take a distribution from their IRAs and from their qualified retirement plans, whether 401k or 403b, as long as they're not actively at work. The rule for forever has been for Roth IRAs, so not Roth 401k accounts, but Roth IRAs, individual accounts. The RMD rules do not apply to Roth IRAs. And that's generally because the RMD rules are tax rules. They are the IRS and the tax code's position that while working, employees have enjoyed tax deferral and tax favored treatment of these contributions throughout their work life. But at some point, the IRS wants their money. And so you have to take a distribution that's taxable at what the IRS considers to be an appropriate age. But for Roth IRAs, all distributions, as long as they're qualified, meaning that they've been there for 5 years and you're older than 59 and a half, those distributions are all tax-free. And so it made no sense to apply minimum distribution requirements on tax-free accounts. That rule, however, never applied to the 401k side of things, to the qualified plan side of things, so that there were required minimum distribution requirements on designated Roth accounts in a 401k or a 403b plan. So this rule basically just reconciles the treatment of Roth IRAs with designated Roth accounts within plans. And all that's to say is that if you have a Roth account within your employer-based plan, you don't need to take a distribution from that, a required distribution from that during your lifetime. And then sort of similarly, on the surviving spouses side, that doesn't have to do necessarily with designated Roth accounts. But again, but Congress here reconciled the treatment of how surviving spouses must take required minimum distributions with how they can on the individual IRA side. And that's just to say, again, that surviving spouses can elect to be treated as their deceased spouse when applying those required minimum distribution rules. And so in certain situations, they could prolong the required taxable distributions from inherited accounts.
Great, thanks, Nick. Appreciate the update on the RMDs, and so I'd like to move our focus now over to contributions and some of the required provisions there. Earl, maybe you can take this. What changes are taking place, first of all, in 2024 that we should be aware of for limit increases, in particular for simple IRAs as well as for IRAs? And I know the IRS recently released the cost of living adjustments for the 2024 tax year, and it looks like there have been some increases in some areas that we'll talk more about in upcoming communications. But for now, if you could talk a little bit about simple IRAs and IRAs.
Sure. So simple IRAs have been, around for a while, for a long time. And so simple IRAs are retirement plans that allow for small employers, 100 employees or fewer, to be able to establish a plan. It's pretty much a no frills type of very simple plan that does not have the reporting requirements, non-discrimination testing, those types of things. So it's pretty simple. But with respect to the act, the idea here is to expand participation, to allow for employees and participants to contribute more towards their retirement. And so they're allowing a 10% increase to salary deferral limits, right? And so the nuance here is that for plan sponsors with 25 or fewer employees, the contribution limit, you'll be able to exceed that with the 10% threshold above the original IRS limit. For employees, plan sponsors with 26 to 100 employees, they can take advantage of the enhanced deferral limit, but they have to kind of up the ante a little bit. And so instead of the statutory 3% match and 2% non-elective contribution, they have to raise it up to 4% match and a 3% non-elective contribution if they want to be able to take advantage of the enhanced salary deferral limit. And so in a real sense, that is the provision that allows for the employees to contribute more. And then also for plan sponsors, I know that prior to 2024, you would not be able to transition your plan to a safe harbor 401k or 403b until the end of the year. You have to start fresh with a new year. Effective in 2024, that shifted a bit so that, employers are permitted to switch to a safe harbor 401k or 403b. For a plan sponsor, the benefits of that is, listen, they may want to contribute more than what can be allowed in a simple IRA, right? There's the ability in terms of plan design options, more robust plan design options that can be made available in a 401k or 403b, loan provisions. And then from a retention perspective, attracting talent, 401k is certainly the retirement plan that a lot of people are aware of and they know about. And so from that perspective, that may be something that plan sponsors may want to consider. And so the legislators are making room for those plan sponsors to be able to do that, right? So in the same spirit of the act, allowing more participants to contribute more in a given tax year.
Earl, great. Thanks on simple IRAs. I'm glad we were able to get the word simple into this webinar in what is obviously a very complex law with a lot of provisions, but great news on the simple IRAs. Talk a little bit about IRAs in general as well.
Absolutely. So just like simple IRAs, the focus is to increase the ability to contribute more. And so that is, in the IRA with respect to this act, the catch-up limit is now $1,000 and it's going to be indexed for inflation. As you see on the screen, we know the applicable limits for both the traditional IRA and the Roth. The wrinkle here is that now it's going to be adjusted for inflation and cost of living increases. So that's going to be effective in 2024. So not a big, change here other than on a year-to-year basis, it's going to be adjusted for inflation with respect to cost of living increases. Okay. And then, they're really focused in on a distribution option that some participants take advantage of, particularly if they're younger than 59 and a half, which is the substantially equal periodic payments. And so basically, if you were to take money out from a qualified plan prior to 59 and a half, obviously you have to pay income taxes on the withdrawal, but then also if you're under that age threshold of 59 and a half, there's a 10% penalty. Well, the way in which some people who are no longer with a employer to kind of be exempt from that 10% penalty is to do equal periodic payments. And provided they maintain that payment schedule for 5 years and the age of 59 and a half, they will also be exempted from that 10% penalty, right? So this is just an expansion of that rule, whereby if, a former employer wants to move those assets from one provider to another, they can do a rollover, a transfer, or an exchange without that same early distribution penalty. So it's just an expansion on an earlier ruling. And again, it allows for those individuals to receive the distribution while at the same time be exempted from the 10% penalty.
Earl, I think that's great. And I would just add to that, for both of these provisions that we're talking about. Again, nothing for plan sponsors to do right now. No required amendments. Even though these are mandatory provisions, we're putting them under the category of mandatory provisions. It's really just operation of the tax code. And so they're going to apply automatically without any requirement that the plan sponsor get involved. On the IRA side, in fact, obviously it's an individual product. But if you have a SEP IRA where contributions are going directly into an individual's IRA, these rules will be important to know. But again, nothing directly that you need to do at this point.
That really covers the required provisions, and I'm just looking at the clock here now. We do have a number of optional provisions that I'd really like to get to that have commanded the public's attention. Most notable among these is the student loan repayment contribution matching provision. Earl, there's been a lot of coverage about the resumption of student loan repayments and the challenges that this might create, especially for younger workers who are trying to start saving for the future. Take us through this provision and how it might help. And then maybe, Nick, you can weigh in on some of the challenges around the provision and additional guidance needed for implementation.
So, Kieran, this is, as you know, is a hot topic, certainly within our public discourse. Many opinions on the matter. However, legislators wanted to really impact particularly younger workers who are saddled with having to repay their student loan debt and the hesitancy of being or a perceived inability to contribute at the same time they're paying their student loans back. And so this is an optional provision that they're putting forth for plan sponsors to match what they call qualified student loan repayment. Now, you have to unpack what qualified is. I'll let Nick handle that aspect. But in a real sense, this is something that plan sponsors particularly can have some discussions as to whether or not they would want to include that. Would that benefit their employee as it relates to a retention perspective or attracting talent? And so this is something as an option that plan sponsors may want to consider including. However, like we said, and I think it's the theme, we're going to beat the drum on this. We need further guidance because, they need to kind of drill down and make it more granular so that we can understand how to implement this on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, Earl, I think that's right. I mean, lots of record keepers around the country are sort of struggling with what to do with this provision. And what I hear from plan sponsors and other practitioners is that it's right now that it's just too vague to sort of roll out robust programs to take advantage of this provision right now. It sort of the top line questions that people have are really what constitutes a qualified loan repayment. What kind of institution would qualify as being eligible for these kind of payments, and how do individuals substantiate that they're actually making payments to these qualified college loans to be eligible for this matching program. And then there's sort of, again, record keeping questions as well, how to actually implement this on a granular basis. So we, again, Mutual of America, along with some of our trade association partners in Washington, have been in touch with both the IRS and the Department of Labor, and frankly, Congress, to ask for some more clarifications on this. And hopefully we'll get some soon. There's such a backlog of provisions that they need to get to that I'm not entirely sure when they'll get to this one, but we're hopeful it'll be before too long. But stay tuned for this one as well.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate the update on that. And I do want to talk about some other optional provisions, these being focused on distributions. So namely those related to domestic abuse distributions, emergency withdrawal distributions, and emergency savings accounts, as we see here on the slide. Nick, why don't you start with some of the key changes related to the domestic abuse distributions?
Sure, you bet. This one, frankly, is pretty straightforward. Thankfully, again, it's optional in the sense that a plan sponsor doesn't need to amend their plan to permit this. This allows for an exception to the normal 10% penalty tax for early distributions, that is, distributions before age 59 and a half, for individuals who need that money to escape some type of domestic violence situation. The good part about this is that plan administrators really don't need to get involved in sort of evaluating whether or not the veracity of those statements, that we can rely on participant self-certification that they're in need of these distributions. The only thing that a plan sponsor will need to do is consider whether or not to allow repayments of the distributions to their plan. The Act does allow repayments of these distributions to a qualified plan, but if the plan doesn't permit those repayments to be made to it, the individual then would make those contributions to an individual product, an IRA, for instance. on their own and then claim a tax refund from the IRS when that happens. So again, nothing necessarily to do here. Think through whether or not you want to include a repayment option for these distributions, and then be aware that individuals are eligible for these to take these distributions without any kind of plan amendment, and you can rely on their what we call self-certification that they meet the requirements of a domestic abuse emergency distribution.
So I'll jump in with the other provisions that we have here. So in the spirit of really trying to anticipate or overcome the hesitancy for some participants being in a retirement plan because of the very nature is long-term. And so if they need emergency savings for whatever the reason, there may be a reluctance to participate. And so this is a way in which that those individuals can be in the plan and provide an option for them if life happens. An emergency situation would take place. So there's an emergency withdrawal distribution up to $1,000 a year. And normally within a retirement plan, if you're under the age of 59 and a half, there'll be a 10% penalty. This does away with that penalty. And then also you'll be able to repay the distribution back within 3 years. And then in the same spirit, participants can actually sock money away in an emergency savings account up to $2,500. Now, with this particular account, these contributions will be made on an after-tax Roth-like basis. And if there are matching contributions from the plan sponsor, those contributions will be matched as well. And so withdrawals can be made at any time, and it'll be tax and penalty free. And so this is, two provisions that aim at really dealing with those individuals who may be reluctant to contribute to a retirement plan with their employer because of, lack of access that was, pretty restrictive because it's a long-term type of retirement plan strategy. So it aims to deal with that.
Well, I think you got it. And I would add just, one other thing. These provisions are sort of a theme in Secure 2.0 to liberalize lots of different distribution options for individuals. So in addition to this, something that became effective last year from Secure 2.0 was the ability to take hardship distributions when you live or work in an area of a federally declared natural disaster. So there's lots of different sort of emergency distribution provisions all at play, and it's probably good for plan sponsors and administrators to understand all of them and to figure out if all of them should be available or none of them should be available or just to coordinate to make sure that you know exactly how people can get to their retirement plan money.
Thanks, guys, for great points on that subject. Two final discretionary provisions I'd like to check in on include mandatory cash outs and simple IRAs. Earl, can you run through each of these for us?
Sure. So for mandatory cash outs, or what we call involuntary distributions, plan sponsors have these former employees still on their rolls. And so from a cost perspective or audit perspective, the legislators are allowing a cash out to be transitioned out of the plan into a default IRA by an approved IRA provider. And what that does is that allows for the plan sponsor to save on some costs, whether it's from a record keeper, there's a per participant charge, or audit costs, right, based on the number of employees on the rolls. And so for this provision, they've expanded the amount that you can actually cash participants out who are no longer working with the employer and transition them to an IRA from $5,000 to $7,000. So it's an increase of that amount so that, again, maybe there's a bit more people that can be scrubbed from the rolls and it could save some costs in terms of the administration of the plan. Also, for simple IRA, it's just adding another option for plan sponsors to contribute more than the statutory rules, right? So 10% of compensation or at a maximum of $5,000, just another additional option to contribute more to your staff. So from the mandatory cash outs to the simple IRA, it just allows a bit more flexibility for both the plan sponsor and for for both plan sponsors. It allows them some flexibility.
Great, thanks, Earl. Really appreciate that. And you know, this a lot of good information on all of these provisions, both required and optional. But as we look ahead, I'm thinking, what are some of the things that plan sponsors can look forward to from Mutual America? Nick, can you tell us a little bit about from a monitoring and regulatory guidance? I know you've covered some of it already.
Excuse me. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's really what a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis is just making sure we're up to speed on what the agencies are going to do and how these provisions are going to be implemented. We do that through, again, as I mentioned, partnership with trade associations in Washington, D.C., whether it's the American Council of Life Insurers or the Investment Company Institute or other groups like that. We're really plugged in to what's going on in both the IRS, the DOL, and up on the Hill. And we try to get out information on a timely basis to our clients. So look for those communications from our communications team that Karen's a part of, because they generally provide or include very helpful information. We also will be right there with you for plan amendments and amendments to the SPDs, summary plan descriptions, when the time comes. If you are signed up for our prototype plans or pre-approved plan documents, those amendments will be made automatically, and we'll get them out to you when they come due. Again, not until the end of the 2025 plan year, so look for those. And we'll update you from time to time as the IRS updates their plan amendment schedule as well. Oftentimes with these big acts, they start out with an amendment date of 1 year, but then it gets pushed to a future year. So that may happen here as well. And if that happens, of course, we'll be with you every step of the way to let you know how to handle it. And Earl, I'm sure that on your end there'll be lots of communications with individual clients, with presentations and so forth to both employers and employees, right?
Absolutely. And again, while this is pretty fluid in terms of seeking that level of guidance, we're certainly going to be boots on the ground in terms of communicating with certainly our clients and prospective clients so that they can get a sense of what needs to be done and then also the decisions that need to be had. Because there are some decisions that I think, again, given what is coming, that, the executive leadership or the board at the board level need to kind of flesh out, particularly for those discretionary plans, even mandatory provisions. What impact, would it have on the plan sponsor? So again, from that perspective, we're going to certainly be there to assist, have these conversations, and provide the proper guidance.
Earl and Nick, thanks so much for providing us with such tremendous knowledge and insights today on this very complex subject. We do have time for a few questions. And I know you can submit, people attending, you can submit questions by clicking the Ask Questions button at the bottom right hand of the console. And if we aren't able to cover your topics, we'll be sure to have a colleague follow up with you soon. One of the questions I see here is, Earl, maybe you can answer this. Can you repeat the eligibility and participation requirements for long-term part-time employees? And what do I need to do now to be ready in January?
So as Nick has stated, there is an administrative transition period. So don't necessarily have to do anything immediate. However, the rule states that part-time workers who have worked for the last 3 years at least 500 hours per year are now eligible. And so the one thing that I think plan sponsors need to do is to certainly make sure that they've counted the hours to know who is eligible to participate. And certainly I think that is the conversations regarding that. And then also whether those individuals will be eligible to receive the matching contribution if available, the non-elective contribution. But that's the rule: 500 hours for 3 effective years for 401k plans in 2024. Now, we talked about the 403b. That's for 2025. They've included 403b plan sponsors subject to ERISA, and the amount of years has gone down from 3 to 2 for all providers, and for all part-time workers. So I hope that's clear. And so 2024 will allow for 3 years, 500 hours. But with the second iteration of the Secure 2.0 Act, it kind of modifies that to allow for 403b plans to now contribute and really allow for part-time workers to be included in the plan. And then 2 years is going to be the go-forward marker down the line. But again, there's a transition period that gives you a little bit of grace.
Hey, Nick, maybe you can take this one. You touched on it earlier. So for student loan provision, when determining criteria for making matching contribution, what constitutes quote unquote qualified student loan payments?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. It's one of the main questions that came out of the enactment of this provision. And I guess the simple answer is we really just don't know yet. We can certainly make guesses at at accredited universities and any kind of student loan guaranteed by Sallie Mae, something like that. But apart from that, we don't know. We just haven't been told yet, although we're asking. So I think for the time being, though I'm not your attorney and I cannot provide our clients legal advice, if I were, I would say that we should just sort of hold pat for now and wait till we get some additional guidelines from the government to figure out exactly how this plan should be implemented.
Let's see. We do have time for a couple more here. On Roth catch-ups. Earl, maybe you can take this. Will I have to have my plan amended multiple times before 2026?
Simple answer is no. So again, there's that constant refrain that we've been talking about this whole webinar. Again, the effective date is 2024, but again, you have some time, you have some grace to implement that mandatory provision.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's right. I would just again add that, especially for Roth, you don't have to do anything until 2026. You don't even have to come into what we call operational compliance with the provision. Unlike some others, like long-term part-time, you have to operate your plan in compliance with the provision beginning in 2024 for 401k plans, but you don't need to have a plan amendment until the remedial plan amendment period ends at the end of the 2025 plan year. So a little bit of a difference here for the Roth catch-ups. You could just sort of ignore it altogether until 2026 because of that transitional relief period.
Great. And I think we'll close here. And maybe this is appropriate, Nick, because it's been the theme running throughout our discussion today. What will Mutual do regarding updating plan documents? And will notices be provided to plan participants?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we have a robust plan document and SPD program here at Mutual of America, and we'll certainly be monitoring the IRS for required modifications, they call it, for exact plan language requirements that need to be adopted. And again, if you're part of our pre-approved plan document program, meaning that there are plan documents that have already been approved by the IRS as to form, when we adopt those amendments on behalf of the plan, they'll automatically be sent out to you as well. For notices, for sure, for the provisions that require notice, Mutual of America generally does provide at least either a sample for plan administrators to distribute to their participants, or sometimes direct distributions to plan participants, depending on the nature of the notice. And we'll certainly be in touch with that with you as well.
Well, I think we can exhale now for a minute. But once again, I want to thank both of you so much for really spending the last hour sharing your knowledge, insights, and expertise on this very important subject, and one I know we're going to be talking a lot more about in the coming year.
Absolutely. I think, this was something that we needed to dig into, so start thinking about it. And I'm certainly looking forward to how all these details will be fleshed out and certainly will be available to assist and support our plan sponsors throughout the country.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. Once again, you can download the presentation slides by scanning the QR code on the screen. And you can also click on the related materials box at the bottom of the screen for more content on Secure 2.0. Finally, we do expect to have additional webinars to share insights and other communications on this act during the year ahead. But before you leave, please take a minute to complete the brief survey about the presentation. And finally, today's webinar will be available at mutualofamerica.com to watch at your convenience. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day.